Good morning, Warriors. Today is Monday, May 25th, 2026. Welcome to Morning Adrenaline. It is time to wake up the warrior. Hey, listen, today I'm going to talk about a hard truth that we're going to expose and then resolve. Most people collapse in chaos and confusion because they never rebuilt themselves without noise. See, if your identity depends on comfort and pleasure, pleasure will expose you constantly. Because eventually, when life removes the distractions, the applause fades, the validation from the world disappears, the relationship changes, and the pressure now arrives at your doorstep. And suddenly, you're forced to confront the person underneath the performance that you've been putting on. See, this is where most people break. It's not about being weak physically, because you never learned how to sit in silence physically long enough to rebuild yourself mentally. So when you spend your entire life escaping discomfort, escaping pressure, escaping responsibility, and ultimately escaping yourself, chaos and confusion stop feeling temporary. And they now become your identity, how you identify yourself. Can you imagine, like, you don't even know it, but many of you are identifying yourself as chaotic and confused. See, once confusion becomes identity, you lose your clarity. You lose discipline, you lose discernment, and eventually, if you haven't already, you're going to lose yourself. But let me give you some good news. There is another path. Yes, it's a harder path, but it's a quieter path. And it's the path where a person stops running from pressure and starts rebuilding yourself through it. Now, I kind of hesitate and hate to tell you this, but there's a power version of you that can only appear when the distractions disappear. When you have no more audience, the applause stops, no validation, no more escape routes. Just you, silence, and time to reflect on you, who you are, who you're being, and who you'll become if you stay the same. Most people hate silence because silence forces confrontation. And I'm not talking about confrontation with the world, I'm talking about confrontation with yourself. So that's why some people stay constantly stimulated and distracted with comfort and pleasure type stuff. Your music's always on. Your phone's always in your hand. Conversations are always happening. You can't stay quiet. Scrolling constantly, consuming constantly. Because you have this problem. If the noise stops, you have to meet the person hiding underneath all of it. All of that noise. And that meeting is usually uncomfortable to the person that has never sat with themselves and examined your weaknesses. The silence exposes what distractions conceal. Weak discipline, emotional instability, unresolved pain, lack of purpose, identity confusion. But isolation has always done something powerful to human beings. It strips the performance away. See, fire either reveals weakness or it forges strength. And people that are willing to rebuild themselves there through discipline, solitude, pressure, and truth become almost unrecognizable. To a point where people say, I don't recognize you anymore. And your response should be, fantastic. See, you built a better version of yourself that people no longer recognize. And listen, it's not because life becomes easier. It's because you become stronger, clearer, calmer, more disciplined, and more, don't miss this, internally free. Stick with me. We're going to come back to that. More internally free and unrecognizable to that outside noisy world that wants you to be stuck in the old version of yourself that you just outgrew. Now, you can think clearly under pressure. You can move intentionally under stress. You can observe without emotional panic, and you can maintain peace while everything around you loses control. So today I'm calling this episode, Everywhere You Go, You Are Still There. See, most people think their problems are external. You think it might be the city that you live in, the relationship, your boss, the environment. Oh, but if you only knew my circumstances. But eventually silence reveals something uncomfortable. You can change environment endlessly, but if you never rebuild yourself internally, you carry the same chaos and confusion into every room you enter until you end the pattern. That's why some people stay stuck no matter where they go. New environment, new habits, new opportunity, same emotional instability. Because the external changed, but your identity did not. Everywhere you go, you're still there, tripping yourself up. And this is why intentional isolation becomes powerful, because isolation removes the distractions, the stimulation, the emotional anesthetics, the pleasure addiction, and the noise long enough for you to finally confront yourself honestly. And I'm not talking about the performance version of you. I'm talking about the real version, the God-given identity version, the high-value human version that's there, but you either haven't discovered it or you can't remember the last time it showed up. See, this is the version beneath the coping mechanisms, the validation addiction, the distractions, the excuses. Because until you learn how to confront yourself honestly, your clarity is not going to arrive. There's no path for it. And without that clarity, you stay trapped repeating cycles you never took the time to understand. So here is my question of the day. If everything around you, everything external disappeared for the next 6 months, and I'm talking about the praise, the attention, the distractions, the social validations, your comfort routines, the entertainment, the pleasure, and really what we're talking about is the noise. Can you sit in silence long enough to become the high-value version of you that you were meant to become? Can you sit in silence long enough being the key part of that question? Now, let me ask you a question. Does this thought scare you? And if so, I want you to remember there is no growth without discomfort. How about this? Would silence expose how dependent you become on stimulation? For most of you, the answer is probably. And my response would be good. That's discomfort. Because a lot of people think they have peace when what they really have is a world of distraction. And when the distractions go away, you know what happens to the peace. See, a lot of people think they have confidence, but what they really have is just false validation. And a lot of people think they know themselves until they finally sit alone long enough to confront themselves honestly. See, that's the danger of constant noise, never turning it off. It keeps people emotionally occupied long enough to avoid self-awareness. But eventually, life is going to get quiet. You're going to have a season, you're going to have a cycle. And when it does, you finally meet the person you've been carrying everywhere this entire time. And that revelation is going to get ugly. See, the highest version, or what I like to call the high value version of yourself, is built on what most people spend their lives avoiding: silence, pressure, discipline, and truth. Now, this is where most people misunderstand isolation completely. So let me tell you what I'm talking about here. Isolation is not hiding from the world. It's not becoming antisocial. It's not slipping into depression. It's not emotional shutdown, and it's certainly not abandoning the people who love you. Isolation is simply intentional separation from noise so identity can become clear. That's the difference. Some people are alone and deteriorating. Others are alone and rebuilding. One is escape. The other is refinement. See, isolation only becomes powerful when it's intentional. So now that we have some understanding out of the way, excuse me, now that we have some of that understanding out of the way, let's hammer home how you rebuild the highest value version of yourself. And this is not going to be temporarily, not temporary fixes, but I'm talking about completely and permanently. Not perfection, but showing up constantly as a high value human. Because becoming the highest version of yourself does not happen accidentally. You don't stumble across it. And it definitely doesn't happen through comfort. It happens through intentional reconstruction of your mind, your body, your habits, your discipline, your standards, your environment, your thinking, and your identity. Everything. And this is where people get it backwards, especially in relationships. So let me give you an example. People leave a broken relationship and immediately start building a checklist for the next, what I like to call victim, right? Here's what I need out of the next person. They need to be healed. They need to be disciplined. They need to communicate better. They need to be emotionally stable. They need to know what they want. I need to make sure they're not stuck on a past relationship. And that's all fine and good. But they're not asking the harder question because they don't want to sit with it. What am I rebuilding in myself so I can show up next time in my highest version too? See, a relationship is a two-way street. Because if your only standard is what someone else needs to become, but you never examine who you are becoming, you're not rebuilding, and you'll likely fail in the next relationship too. Because you're going to find that built person and they're not going to accept that you haven't rebuilt, that you're still stuck on things. So stop outsourcing your responsibility. It creates chaos and confusion everywhere in your life. See, the truth is most people are reacting emotionally to life while hoping things improve. And hope without structure changes nothing. That's why people stay trapped in cycles for years. They have the same confusion, habits, emotional patterns, the same lack of discipline. They're constantly being distracted by the same things. Different environments, different relationships, same unbuilt identity. Because external change means nothing without internal reconstruction. And rebuilding yourself requires something most people avoid. Truth. The truth about your habits, the truth about your discipline, the truth about your addictions, the truth about your emotional instability, the truth about the version of yourself you and everyone around you has been tolerating to a point. The point being the partner that said, no more of you, not tolerating that. And now you call him a narcissist and you haven't yet looked in the mirror. You are the pot and they are the kettle. Transformation, guys, can only begin the moment you stop escaping yourself. And once that happens, everything changes. So today, we're going to walk through the truths that will rebuild you from the inside out. Let's go. The first truth, you must go through pressure to rebuild yourself. See, you don't realize rebuilding is necessary until pressure shows up. So pressure is not necessarily destroying you, but it is definitely exposing you. That's the difference. Comfort conceals instability, pressure reveals it. That's why the pressure matters. Pressure reveals where discipline is weak, where emotions control you, where your habits collapse, where your identity still lacks structure. See, most people spend their lives trying to avoid pressure, but pressure is where rebuilding begins. Because pressure forces you to finally be honest with you. It shows you what still owns you, your fear, your ego, your comfort, your impulse, your validation, your distractions. Everybody wants a miracle, but nobody wants the fire that it takes to create it. Nobody wants the discomfort, the sacrifice, the silence that leads to the rebuilding of self. But the strongest people are not people who avoid pressure. They're people who became capable within it. So if you want to rebuild yourself, stop asking, how do I avoid pressure? And start asking, how do I become stronger inside of it? Every time pressure shows up, how do I use this to my advantage? The second truth is you must remove the noise. You can't rebuild yourself while constantly being overstimulated. Noise fragments your identity. Silence organizes it. And look, modern culture profits from keeping people distracted. We know this. Constant scrolling, constant entertainment, constant stimulation, constant opinions, constant dopamine, constant fear-mongering. And eventually people lose the ability to hear themselves think. That, my friends, is dangerous because clarity cannot exist in constant noise. And this is why intentional isolation matters. It's not to abandon your life. It's to hear yourself clearly again. Because a lot of people are not relaxing. They're escaping themselves with alcohol, marijuana, pornography, validation addiction, pleasure addiction, endless entertainment, distraction after distraction, noise and more noise. And none of these things are always destructive by themselves. I want you to understand. I'm not saying they're constructive, but by themselves, they're not always completely going to be destructive to you. But when they become emotional anesthesia, now they become dangerous. Because now they're being used to avoid truth, silence, responsibility, your self-awareness, and your identity confrontation. And the problem with avoidance is this. We already said it, everywhere you go, you are still there. So if you want to rebuild yourself, you must remove noise to finally confront yourself with honesty. Here's truth number 3. You must regain control over your mind and your flesh. Human beings have always wrestled between discipline and impulse, purpose and pleasure, clarity and temptation, peace and indulgence. The flesh wants comfort, ease, escape, immediate, instant gratification. But a man led by every urge eventually loses authority over self. That's why discipline matters spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. Romans chapter 8, verse 6 says, "The mind governed by the flesh is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace." What governs you determines what you become. And this is why fasting, as an example, has always been so powerful. Talk to somebody that's fasted. It's not because food is evil. It's because fasting teaches the mind you do not have to obey every single urge that pops up in front of you. This is deep transformation. Because every time you override impulse intentionally, your self-respect increases. You feel better. You're more energized. You're more powerful. Now, discipline strengthens, clarity sharpens, and peace increases. And this is where rebuilding starts to accelerate. Because the moment you stop obeying every craving, you begin reclaiming authority over yourself. A weak man follows every urge. A disciplined man decides which urges deserve their obedience. Moving into truth number 4, you must build discernment in silence. See, discernment rarely develops in crowds. Crowds reward conformity. It's called tribalism. Silence develops observation, and once noise decreases, you begin seeing clearly again. This is where discernment sharpens. You start noticing your patterns as well as patterns of others. Things like manipulation, false confidence, inauthenticity, emotional instability, performative identities, people that are just performing inauthenticity, weak character, because people reveal themselves through patterns, not isolated moments, but long patterns that go way back in your history that you keep repeating. And this is why intentional isolation changes a man completely, because silence restores independent thinking. Don't miss that. Silence restores independent thinking. That's actually good. Maybe that's going to be our next podcast. See, now you stop reacting emotionally to everything. You observe first, process carefully, respond intentionally, and that's called maturity. A person without discernment absorbs chaos and confusion. A person with discernment studies it. And once mental noise decreases, your clarity now is going to increase. Your confidence will increase, your creativity. How long has it been since you felt like you've been creative? That you weren't just restating what everybody else was stating? Fitting into your tribe. When did you get out? When's the last time you got out of your box and became a little bit creative? And I'm talking about your thoughts right now. Because creativity requires space. A distracted mind consumes, a clear mind creates. And once a man is no longer afraid of solitude, his standards increase naturally and his confidence grows. Now, discernment becomes protection. And the fifth and final truth is you must become someone you respect in private. And this is where rebuilding becomes real, because eventually every person reaches a moment where performance stops working. People read through it. They see you as inauthentic. You can't perform your entire life and get away with it. And when that moment comes, you meet the person you actually built. Not the version you projected online, not the version people praised, not the version designed for approval. You're going to be confronted with the real version of you. The version that exists when nobody is watching, and that's why isolation matters so much. Because isolation removes the performance. There's nobody left to perform for, and you're left with you. Now there's nowhere left to hide. There's no distractions. There's no validation from the outside. There's no emotional escape hatches. Just you, your habits, your discipline, your mind, your standards, and your integrity. And that's comfortable for a lot of people because many people spend years building an image of an image instead of building themselves. Look at social media. But image is a performance that cannot survive pressure forever. Truth eventually exposes everything. That's why private discipline matters, because the strongest people are not performing strength publicly. They're building strength privately. See, a man built in isolation becomes internally free, and it's not because life has all of a sudden become easy. It's because he no longer needs external validation to remain stable. He doesn't crumble because someone dislikes him. He doesn't panic because people misunderstand him. He doesn't betray himself for acceptance because isolation forced him to meet himself honestly. And once a man survives that process, social pressure loses power over him. Write this down. A man built in silence can love deeply, but that does not mean he's weak. A disciplined man is not harmless. He's controlled. And there's a difference. Weak men confuse aggression with strength because they lack emotional regulation. But a disciplined man develops restraint. And restraint becomes dangerous when necessary because it's intentional. He doesn't need to prove himself constantly. He doesn't need attention to feel powerful. He doesn't need chaos to feel significant, because real strength is stability. And stability becomes rare in a world addicted to emotional reaction. The most dangerous man in the room is not the loudest man. It's the disciplined man who can remain peaceful until peace is no longer an option. And once a man reaches that level of internal control, he moves differently. You can see it. You can hear it in the way he speaks. You can see it in the way he walks. You can feel it in the way he moves. He thinks differently. He leads differently. He responds differently because he rebuilt himself from the inside out. Now, let's close this the right way. Every day you're building yourself into someone. The only question is, are you doing it intentionally or accidentally? See, understand life is always shaping you through pressure, through habits, environment, discipline, comfort, distraction, through what you tolerate, through what you avoid. And most people never realize they're slowly becoming someone they don't even respect privately. Not because you lacked potential, but because you avoided that reconstruction process, that rebuilding of yourself in silence, using the 5 methods the 5 rules we just talked about, the 5 truths. You avoid silence, you avoid pressure, you avoid accountability, you avoid discipline, you avoid truth, and over time, avoidance becomes your identity. But the highest version of yourself is not found. It has to be built in silence, built in pressure, built in discipline, and in truth, built in the moments where nobody's watching. You still choose growth anyway. That's what isolation is really for. Not hiding from the world, but rebuilding yourself before returning to it. A man who learns how to rebuild himself internally becomes very difficult to break externally. Now his confidence is not performance anymore. It's earned. Now his peace is not temporary. It's built. Now his discipline is not emotional. It's identity. And once a person reaches that level, they stop moving through life emotionally reactive. Now they move intentionally. They think clearly, they lead clearly, they love clearly, and they discern clearly. Because chaos and confusion no longer control them internally. And eventually life reveals the truth in everyone. Pressure reveals it, silence reveals it, isolation reveals it. And when that moment comes, the version of you that appears will be the version you built in private. So here's the final question I want to leave you with. Who are you becoming when nobody is watching? Because eventually that version becomes the permanent version of you. And if you keep escaping yourself, you'll keep meeting the same broken version of yourself in every environment you enter. But if you